President Trump came into office vowing to save American jobs, which is why his announcement this week is raising so many eyebrows. A plan to save Chinese jobs at that country's struggling telecom giant, ZTE. Trump's motives for doing it are coming under some scrutiny and some criticism, as are the consequences of a step that could actually complicate his efforts to rein in North Korea and Iran's nuclear programs. Joining us in Washington is Steve Bell, senior advisor at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Here with us in the studio are Asher Westropp-Evans. Asher, before we get into why, lay out the nuts and bolts of this story.
Okay, Nurit, so what happened here is you've got this company, ZTE. This is the second biggest telecommunications company in China, a massive organization that has been banned in the United States for 7 years for violating sanctions and doing trade with Iran and North Korea. Now, the biggest problem there being that they use US componentry in their products, phones, telecommunications products that they develop, that they're then selling on to these countries that are on US sanctions lists. Now, the US has banned them as part of a massive bipartisan national security operation in which they fined them $1.19 billion, a huge sum, put this ban in place and effectively hobbled this company that was heading for bankruptcy and sort of taken out of the way. Now, on Sunday, Trump came out with this tweet, sort of seemingly out of the blue, stating his support for the company and looking to get ZTE back into business. And just today, he's received a lot of kickback from that. And just today, he tweeted further responses looking to sort of pass back some of those remarks, stating that the Washington Post and CNN have typically written false stories about our trade negotiations with China. Nothing has happened with ZTE except as it pertains to the larger trade deal. Our country has been losing hundreds of billions of dollars a year with China. Now, what we can see from this tweet clearly is that Trump is using this as part of trade negotiations, whereas others in the intelligence community see this as more of a security issue. In fact, Trump's own nominee for the counterintelligence director had this to say before a Senate committee yesterday.
What are the national security implications of giving ZTE sanctions relief?
Well, Senator Wyden, I'm not particularly up to speed with the sanctions with regard specifically to ZTE. I will say that the intelligence community and federal law enforcement is on the record with this committee and the American people with respect to the threat posed by China Telecom.
Well, yes, what a twist. Well, let's go first now to Steve Bell there in Washington. And Steve, President Trump saying that this turnabout on ZTE is part of some trade strategy. Does that argument hold water here?
Well, it may. It sounds like he's engaged in another real estate deal, though. You know, ZTE, for almost a decade now, has been identified by the American intelligence community, by Australia, and by the Great Britain as a dangerous company that has deep ties to the Chinese government. So this is not new. In fact, the sanctions were first put on in 2016 by the Obama administration, and the first real report criticizing Huawei and ZTE was published way back in 2012 by the House Intelligence Committee. So it may be a real estate deal kind of, I'll give you this, you give me that, and we'll all get together on North Korea. But right now, he's caused a lot of discomfort in the intelligence community.
Steve, hasn't a pillar of Donald Trump's campaigns and his presidency, at least publicly, been railing against Chinese trade violations, against Chinese companies' trade violations? And is ZTE not one of those companies?
Oh, yes. As was pointed out earlier, they were fined almost $1.2 billion and admitted to being guilty of trading with North Korea and Iran. They cannot exist as a company if they don't have components from Qualcomm in the United States, from Qualcomm and from Intel. So saying that those companies can't do business with ZTE really would doom the company. I think it's inexplicable to people in the intelligence community, especially after what the defense secretary said not more than a month ago. Don't use ZTE products because we think they can compromise national security. And that's from General Mattis himself.
Steve, some Democrats there in Washington are pointing to an investment that the Chinese made in an Indonesian resort project just days before this turnabout by the president on ZTE. That's a $500 million investment in a project that has that involves the Trump family business. They're licensing some of the properties there. And these Democrats are suggesting this looks like a possible bribe. Is that overreaching by Democrats, or is there something here that stinks a little bit?
Well, one, there's something here that stinks a little bit, but number two, I think that's overreaching. The fact is, given the notion that we don't have any idea of what the Trump holdings are, we've never seen his tax returns, and we know that he's been involved in resorts all over the place, I think people are jumping to a conclusion. But what bothers most people in the town is this. Under two administrations, under two different Congresses, with a lot of people looking at this, they have all concluded that ZTE is a bad actor. Don't use their products, and in certain areas, you're not allowed to bring into your room or into some meeting a ZTE-based cell phone. That's how concerned the intelligence community is. And so if it's a deal or if it's not a deal, I have no idea. All I know is this. This is not a typical real estate transaction in which you offer this block for that block, this building for this building. This cuts right to the core of cybersecurity.
Steve, there's an added layer of not just security, but diplomacy. Briefly, we're talking about a company that has violated sanctions, as Asher told us, against Iran and North Korea when, what do you know it, President Trump is trying to rein in the nuclear programs of both of those countries. What kind of implications could that have? What message does that send to them?
Well, I think it says, you know what, we can probably offer a little bit and get a lot out of the Americans. I think it weakens our position depending on whether North Korea or Iran is addressed first. I assume North Korea will be. But this being completely transactional this way, almost tactical, is something that could backfire on the president.
All right, a pretty incredible story, and there's so much to watch in Washington, as we just heard from our Dan Raviv. Every day, it's hard to keep track, but this is one of those stories that does seem worth watching. Steve Bell and Asher Westropp-Evans.